Hi, buddy. Jeff here. Outside today and thinking about some more of these topics to address in some of these videos. So one of the things I want to kind of address is kind of in the vein of diversity and inclusion. Um, is kind of the whole topic of inclusive language, and there are lots of different names for this thing, right? It all kind of started out about what 2 years ago with the whole thing of we can't say blacklist and whitelist, right? That was kind of the main thing, or master and slave, and even if it has other meanings, right? Of like in the software world or whatever, or in the kind of the online content world of these kinds of terms. But the whole thing inclusive language has kind of been watching it, seeing a few colleagues that are getting more involved in it. I mean, and I'm a linguist, but I mean, it's not one of the tasks I'm supposed to be focusing on, right? So other people are focused on it, but I'm really watching, been analyzing it as people have been, talking about it. I've been watching, how it happens in other organizations, in other companies, in other institutions, seeing how it's happening in ours, and watching what the kind of the discussions are about, right? So it moved from that beginning thing is we need to work with a couple of, a short list of words, right? That we need to replace everywhere, or analyze and replace, and decide if we have to replace it with other words, right? Um, and how far do you have to replace it? To what extent, and how far back do you have to replace it, right? So that's kind of the whole thing. But then it turned into something more. It played into the thing with the whole gender reform, or the whole language reform with gender forms, right? So um, and that was a lot of if you come from the English language thing, you just replace the thing with there, right? It's and you can say there for singular, or there for plural. It works for both, right? So it's really easy to kind of do this, and people have been doing it for a long time. I've been writing it. I'll say this, use the word there too if I want to be ambiguous, right? On who said something, and this even comes out in formal publications. So it's okay to do this. However, as we begin to look at this at a more deeper level, for specific languages that have complex gender, and well, it's not just gender, it's time. It's actually, we refer to this as TMA, time, mode, and aspect. TMA combined with gender, right? And it's not really gender. I don't want to call this gender, because gender makes it seem like it's the masculine and feminine. It's not about gender, okay? It's about marked and unmarked nouns usually, okay? Um, and this is a linguistic feature, right? So it's called markedness, and it's usually a plus or minus thing, usually. But some languages do have other forms. You can call it, they call them neuter or whatever. But we call these masculine and feminine. You don't have to call them masculine and feminine. There's no reason to call them masculine and feminine. It's just they are called that. And now we're getting into the debate about whether it's masculine and feminine. It's not about that. It's about whether it's marked or unmarked, right? If we call it unmarked and unmarked, then we'd avoid this whole debate, right? Of calling it gender. This is the issue. So that's my first statement: is we'd get around this whole thing by calling it markedness, right? And we don't have to call it gender. We have to worry about being inclusive or not, because it's not masculine and feminine. It's about more common or not, right? Markedness. The feminine form is usually the more common one, right? The masculine form is the more uncommon one. It's just how it is in linguistic features. Again, markedness. Do your research on markedness, okay? Then you understand this. Um, and it tends to be that the feminine forms are more common. Um, now, if we want to continue on this path of female and masculine gender in language, because that's what people call it, right? Again, I said we shouldn't have called it that, and we would have avoided this whole problem. But if we kind of continue that, then we have to make multiple forms, or some language forms that try to do this with. You got to have written forms that have the masculine and the feminine, singular and plural, all in one batch with a bunch of slashes or dots, right? To show the masculine and plural, the masculine, feminine, and the singular and plural, and it gets kind of messy to read, right? Depending on how the grammar of the language forces you to use the forms that are this. And some languages like English, you don't have to worry about it too much, right? You just don't have to. But you start getting the language that have a lot of, they're called agglutinative languages, right? Agglutinative means they have these affixes, right? All these affixes that are tense, they're time, well, it's time, mode, and aspect, right? We can call it tense too. So, but the so if you start having all these words in your sentence that have all these multiple or these different possible forms, add to that the languages that have a lot of case logic, right? So these are, we call this a thematic case or semantic case, theta roles, semantic roles. There are different words for this. In a grammatical thing, we just call them cases, right? So they're referred to as cases even in kind of the, in some case grammars, right? So ones that have a lot of it are Latin and, German, Finnish, and a lot of these languages, right? So Finnish has Finnish has what, 16 different declensions, so it's kind of really intense at Allen's way. But the thing is to understand that if you have to have all your dative, accusative, nominative, and locative in all these different cases, and then you have all these different forms that you could do that could fit with the masculine and feminine with these, you end up with these written sentences that are completely illegible. I mean, it's just, every 3 words you've got a form that has four to 6 or 8 forms, right? It just depends. And then that's where it just becomes, you can't read it anymore, right? That's where it gets kind of tough. So it's not really practical. In fact, it would become so impractical that you'd have to use a search engine to read anything, right? It's just to find forms it's unnecessary, right? If we call it markedness, we don't have to call it, just call it markedness. Then we can get around this whole thing. But we want to stick to the masculine and feminine because it's a traditional thing that we've always done, and we got to do it because we've always done it. But this actually also becomes a political. It's lobbying too. I mean, some people use this to be able to, fight for their cause. So I'm just saying. I'm not saying that this is proven. I mean, but if you get people that want to fight for their kind of political party, they'll do it for their political party. They'll do things. People want to fight for certain other causes. They want to fight for feminism. They could use this. Say we want to have this because it ends up being unreadable, and then the text is unreadable. So something we need to really think about. Now, how far back do we have to clean this stuff up, right? If we got to change it, first got to decide what forms we're going to use. Get committees to make decisions on this, and believe that's a never-ending debate, and no one ever will finish it. Look at some of these language committees just on whether you can change an F to a PH, right? Or back and forth, or whatever, or a PH to F to make it more simpler, right? That would affect my son's own name, right? If we had to change a PH to an F. And would he want to do that? Right? I mean, this gets into identity too, right? So this, I think what's really important is to, I mean, there's no answer to this, right? There's no real answer. It just depends on how long we want to make the debate go on for, and how long we want to do it. And I'm totally for inclusiveness. I'm not against it. I'm just saying that we can avoid this problem by just calling it something else. Then we don't have to call it masculine and feminine anymore. Then we can have debates over other stuff, right? So we could have singular and plural of the whatever the markedness, right? People will find things to fight and debate about. But I think it's really, so there's that. And then there's the whole thing of this comes into the whole thing of the racism too, right? And that comes into play, I mean, you can't say black hole anymore. I mean, there are times I've had meetings and stuff, and I'm using a word that has a meaning, like that went into a black hole, right? And then I said, oh, I can't use black hole because it's got the word black in it, right? And I kind of jokingly, because I don't know if I need to jokingly make a joke about it or actually excuse myself or apologize, because black hole is a black hole. I mean, black hole has nothing to do with racism or slavery. It has to do with the fact that it is a black hole with no light, right? There's no light in it. and light cannot escape from it, right? That's the way this thing functions in the universe, out in outer space, right? So we've got a name called the black hole because there's no light in it. Absence of light. Darkness. Black. Okay? So this, again, we got this gets into hypercorrection of political correctness, right? Political correctness is sometimes good and sometimes bad because it gets, if you start getting hypercorrecting and getting to the point where you have to correct everything to find another form, you're constantly trying to create vanilla flavor things to be able to say things that actually are okay if you just consider them not to be offensive because they're not literal, right? They have another metaphorical meaning. And is it okay, is it good or bad for the metaphorical meaning? This is a whole debate. So I mean, I have no problem saying black hole, or having saying of white paper, right? Because it's white. It is white paper. Or there's a white paper too. Now, why is he called a white paper? That's an interesting question. I have to think about that linguistically, right? I'm thinking off the top of my head. But there are some things where I wouldn't say, right? There are some words I just won't use because they do have a reference to history of slavery or something. Saying master or slave for a master or slave disc, I mean, it's an opinion, right? It all comes down to opinion. We could probably, we could say first or secondary. I'd be okay with that. Yeah, it's a primary or secondary disc or whatever. Yeah, there are ways to get around it. And that does get away from the idea of indicating a master or slave as a relationship between people. Yeah, I'm okay with that. But again, there are other things that you don't have to worry about it, right? And that's where the whole debate turns into and then people are wondering what they can say in meetings or whatever because they're just apologizing for things that are in their natural language, right? Um, so, and it gets into all kinds of debates of, do you have to sign do you have to, on your social media, do you have to say him or her or his or her or whatever? I mean, this just goes so far. Yeah, and I try to avoid those things because I don't think they're relevant. I don't think they're really a major relevant thing. Hey, if someone's gay, hey, fine. I have no problem with that. I have no problem that they have, rights to get medical insurance. I mean, it's just no big deal. Uh, when it becomes to get, I've got plenty of friends and family that are, have been in that, or have in that kind of, that's what they are. Okay, so big deal. No big deal. No big deal. So, but it all comes down to is really where we want to put our focus. And I think we need to get over, we need to avoid getting into hypercorrection too much, overcorrecting, over-engineering it, hypercorrecting it, making words more than they actually were. And I think we could get out of this whole debate. We could reduce 80% of the stuff, of the issues, by just calling it markedness and no longer calling it masculine and feminine, right? We could really avoid the debate. It's easier to change that in some textbooks than to change all the words, right, inside of sentences and have to do all the multiple forms. Just call it markedness, right? Some forms are marked, some forms are not marked. They have a form. Don't change the form, don't change anything, right? Something to think about, folks. So that's my markedness explanation with regard to diversity inclusion today. Thanks so much. Have a good one.